Drawing this winter bunny is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. So as usual, we are going to start by creating a new canvas so we have somewhere to draw. Here in this demo, I'm just going to use the dimensions of the iPad screen because, again, it's a demo, but make sure you find something that works for your own project requirements. Now, if you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision, so I will link it in the description below. And once you have your canvas, if you want to have the little reference image like here, on the top left or wherever else you want to put it, all you have to do is click on the wrench icon at the top, select the canvas option, and then you're going to be able to activate reference. Once you activate the reference, you're just going to be able to import the image. If you want to download the image that I have as a reference, I will link it in the description below as well. And I always encourage you very strongly to try and pick your own colors because this is really good practice for when you're doing your own illustrations, even if this just means trying to recreate the colors that I have on my screen on your screen. But if you feel more comfortable with a color palette, I included mine as well. It will all be linked together in the description below. But for the sketch, which is what we're going to start with, you can use any color of your choice because we're not going to see it in the final result anyway, so I'm just going to go with a neutral gray. And we're going to create a new layer, and this layer we're going to rename it to Sketch. And here on this channel, if you're new, you might not necessarily know that yet. Well, if you're new, you don't know that yet. But we start by just roughly mapping out the main shape in a very rough sketch. So at first it's not going to look pretty, but that's totally okay. And in this video, I'm always going to be suggesting two different kind of brushes. One is going to be a free brush that comes with Procreate. It's going to allow you to follow along just fine, especially this video. The brushes really don't matter that much. And the other brush is going to be a brush from my Ultimate Illustration Bundle. So these brushes are going to be linked in the description below as well. And there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people. They're probably going to help you get a more professional result as well as just save some time overall. But again, they're not essential, so you can still follow along with just free brushes. Especially for the sketch, since we're not seeing it in the final result, the brush really doesn't matter. You can either use in the sketching panel, so the free brushes from Procreate, the HB pencil, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the sketching brush. So the main goal for this rough sketch is just to place the main elements and breaking down the character in the most simple shape possible so that later we can refine it. So we are going to start with the head, which is going to be just a very simple circular shape. It doesn't need to be a perfect circle at all. And then we're going to draw a line that is going to be roughly showing the direction of the back. So kind of a line for the spine, I guess. And this one, since our character is kind of skating, it's going to be leaning forward. This line for the spine is going to be this kind of curve like this. Now, we are also going to be drawing an oval to draw the body of the bunny. So not just the spine, it's actually going to have a body. And then you can go ahead and just roughly map out where the legs are going to be. So you can go in straight with the legs like this if you want, or it might be a little bit more easy to just draw some circles that would be, I guess, the hips. So just circles that touch the body and map out where the legs are going to come out of. And then you can just go in and draw the leg shape. So that's kind of breaking it down an even simpler shape than just doing the bean shape for the leg from the start, just drawing the little circles for the hips and then expanding on the legs from there. Once you have your legs, you can draw these little very simple boots. Well, they're going to be skates, but for now they just look like boot. And again, you can see we're not going into details at all right now. We just want to roughly sketch the position of all the limbs as well as roughly what is going to be in our illustration in the end. So don't worry here about erasing at all. You don't need to erase. You can just draw as many lines as you want. In the next step, we're going to go ahead and refine and clean up the sketch. You can also draw a little tail, so just a little circle above the leg that is raised. And speaking of the legs, here we're doing something that resembles a running motion, which means the limbs are going to be going in opposite directions. So if we look at the right side of the bunny, which is the side that is closest to us, you can see that the leg is reaching backwards and the arm is reaching forward. And then on the other side of the bunny, so the left side, the side that is furthest away from us, the leg is reaching forward and the arm is going to be reaching backwards. In this case, we're just going to see the elbow a little bit like this. So go ahead and sketch the limbs. And once you have the limbs, you can move on to the facial features. So for that, I always like to sketch a little plus sign, so the vertical middle and the horizontal middle, so that then I can align my eyes, draw a little nose, and maybe also a little cute mouth on the side. You can also go ahead and sketch the scarf. So for that, just kind of a rough, slightly curved rectangle around the neck, and then you can draw super big, flowy scarf ends, I guess, or shorter ones if you want. Here, that's totally up to you. You have the creative liberty, as always, when you're drawing your own illustrations, but that's just something I really like to have. A lot of flow and movement. It looks like the character is going fast, and there's a little bit of wind. We're also going to be showing this flow and movement later in the ears, so you have another opportunity if you want to just have a short scarf or no scarf at all. You can also draw a little beanie, so kind of this wavy rectangle laying down on the top of the head of the rabbit, and maybe a little kind of C-curve like this for the top of the beanie. Try to follow along the shape of the front of the head. So just kind of pretending that the beanie is actually resting on the head and not just, standing upwards, because that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You can also add a little pom-pom on the top of the beanie if you want, and that's where I was telling you about the big ears. I like to have really large ears on my bunny characters, so you could draw that as well, or you can have more of a floppy ear character with the ears dropping down if that's what you want. So again, here, total creative liberty to you, but you can also just copy what I'm doing. That's totally fine. We're learning together. That's the main goal. So once you have this super crazy rough sketch, you can always use the arrow tool to reposition it in your canvas, I guess. And we're going to clean it up because right now it's a big mess of line, which is totally fine. This is what we're doing right now. We're just building the illustration, but before adding the color, we're going to just clean it up. So go ahead and lower the opacity of your sketch. So to do that, you can just click on the little N next to the check mark and then play with the opacity. And we're also going to flip it. So going back to the arrow tool here, you're going to select flip horizontal at the bottom, and that's going to mirror the image. And that is going to give you a fresh look on your sketch. So any kind of mistake that you're making or anything that doesn't look quite right, you're going to see it better that way. And you're going to be able to draw a nicer, clean sketch that way as well. Speaking of clean sketch, go ahead and create a new layer above your sketch layer, and on this one you're just going to go over and find your line. So you're going to pick which line you want to actually use out of all the crazy construction line that you sketched first in the rough sketch. So here, this is not really a complicated step, but it's a very important one because this is where you're actually going to decide what your character is going to look like. So when we go and do a rough sketch at first, we're being super creative, we're being very loose because we want to have a lot of movement in our illustration. We're not really worried about how the lines look and just the flow of everything as much. But when we are working on cleaning up the sketch, this is what we want to figure out exactly how the curves are going to work together, the proportions a little bit more. Well, the proportions, we do them quite a lot in the rough sketch as well. But yeah, I guess mostly the curves and the angles and everything, just making sure that it looks good. It doesn't need to be perfect. Again, we won't see the sketch in the final result either. So you don't need to have clean lines or erase or anything like that, but you just really need to make sure you have a clear idea of where your colors are going to be. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and comment snow. If you're new on the channel, you might be like, what's the deal with the secret password? Well, we've been doing this for months now, and people really seem to like it. Basically, it does a few things. It gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and paste my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys. And after all, that's what we want, right? But it also gives me a way of seeing who's part of the creative community here on the channel, because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, I get to see sometimes your name, sometimes your face even, and yeah, it's just really cool to see who's part of our creative community. So just leave a comment with the word snow, and then we're gonna keep going. Basically just finishing the clean sketch, and once you have the clean sketch, you could go ahead and decide to either work with only the clean sketch, so deleting or hiding the base sketch, or merging the two together by just squishing them with 2 fingers. That is what I personally like to do, because I find the construction lines to be very, very helpful into shading later. And with that, you're going to be ready to just flip your sketch back. So before moving on to the character, we're going to draw roughly the background, because otherwise the character is white and we're barely going to see it. So we are going to change the blending mode of the sketch layer to multiply, and we are going to lower the opacity until we can just barely see it. That way it's not going to get in the way of what we're drawing, but with multiply we're still going to see the line on darker colors. Once that's done, we're going to create a new layer below the sketch, and we're going to rename this layer to background shape. And here you could color the entire background if you want. I like to have this kind of organic egg side shape. I don't know. I just think it's pretty cool, and it would work really, really well on greeting cards as well. So for that, you would pick the darker blue on the bottom right of the palette, or any other color of your choice, honestly. And in terms of brushes, you can pick the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or the outline brush from the illustration bundle. So here we're going with a brush that has a little bit more texture, like a charcoal or pencil brush would work really, really well if you're working in a different kind of app. And here you can really draw any kind of shape of your choice. You could go with a perfect circle, but I like to go with this sort of a like side egg shape. So just something very simple. And you can use the color drop to fill in your shape. So just dragging the color on the top right onto the shape, and then adjusting the threshold until it just barely fills the color. So before it fills the entire canvas, that's kind of where you stop moving your pencil. And in case you don't know necessarily how to adjust the threshold, all you have to do is when you're dropping your color, before you lift the pencil, you can move it from right to left or left to right to change the amount of fill, I guess. So you're just going to play with that amount until, like I was saying, it fills the entire shape without filling the entire screen. And before we move on, we're going to place the shape and the sketch exactly where we want everything to be in the canvas. So you can use the arrow tool and position the shape wherever you want. You might need to resize it or maybe even distort it. So using the uniform or distort option on the bottom of your arrow tool, depending what you want to do. Distort is going to allow you to change the proportions, and uniform is going to keep the proportions the same. So place your background where you want it to be, and then go ahead and select your sketch layer, making sure this time you use uniform because we don't want to distort the rabbit. We worked really hard on that sketch. And then you're going to be able to place the rabbit where you want it to be in relation to both just the canvas in general as well as the background shape. Here you can see it's already a little bit different than what I had in my example. The ears are kind of slightly different. The scarf is longer and even flowier than what I did in my example. So yours is going to be different as well. And that's the beauty of creating our own illustrations. We can adapt them and they're unique in their own ways. I do like to have the scarf and the ears poke out a little bit of the background shape. It makes it feel a little bit more dynamic. So just a little tip right here. And once you have your background shape and sketch in position, we are going to draw the eyes. So for that, you're going to swipe your background shape layer with 2 fingers towards the right to activate alpha lock. You can also just tap on the layer and activate it manually. But now everything we draw on this background shape layer is going to stay within the shape that we already sketched. So we're going to pick a lighter version of our blue. So the same kind of blue, just way, way, way paler. And you are going to go ahead and with the same brush, just basically place a line for the horizon, and then you can just fill the bottom manually. Now, since we're drawing on the shape that already has color, you cannot use color fill, otherwise it's going to fill in the entire shape again, and that's not what we want, so you just have to fill it in manually. But that's kind of nice because you're going to get some of the texture from the brush, which is going to help you build your texture in your illustration. Once that is done, you can pick pure white and either zoom in or just draw it from afar and draw kind of this very loose S-curve, which is going to just show that the character is skating, it's coming from somewhere, it's kind of doing some little tricks around, I don't know, it just grounds the character even more in the background. We're also going to be creating a new layer above the background shape in order to draw some, I guess, kind of vignette shadows. So just a new layer, renaming it to shadows. And this one we're going to use the blending mode linear burn, so just right here. And for now we can lower the opacity around 50%, but you can always just tweak it later. It totally depends on the colors that you use. And we're going to apply this layer as a clipping mask, so just tapping on it and selecting clipping mask in the menu. And for the color, you're gonna go with a slightly darker blue than the eyes, but lighter than the sky. And you're just going to be drawing this crescent moon shape towards the bottom of your background shape. It doesn't have to be precise at all, because in the very next step we're going to blend that edge in a little bit. I mean, you could keep it harsh if you want, but it's kind of a strange look. So using the smudge tool, setting it to the stucco brush from the painting panel, you can just go over and blend in your edge like this. So we're going to be using the smudge tool with the stucco brush a lot in this video to blending the shadows in general. So this is just a really cool tool that you can use to smooth in any kind of edge that is too harsh without creating like a super smooth gradient. Once that is done, we're going to add some snow. I like to draw the snow in a separate layer in case I want to move it around or erase something very quickly. So just creating a new layer. This is also going to be a clipping mask applied to the background. And we're going to use white, and Procreate is really cool. It does have some snow brushes, well, one snow brush. So it is at the bottom in the elements panel here. It's called Driven Snow. It's quite dense, so you might have to erase some little particles, but as you can see, you can just brush over and really quickly add some snowflakes. If you're working in a different software, you might have to draw them individually. That's totally fine. You just use the same brush that you used before and draw some little snowflakes. And you can also play with the opacity so that these snowflakes look a little bit less intense and just blend in with the background better. Awesome, so with that, we're ready to start adding the colors for the bunny itself. So you might want to group your background layers first, and to do that, you can just swipe them towards the right with one finger to select them, and then clicking the group option at the top, you're then going to be able to collapse and rename your group to background. Once that is done, go ahead and create a new layer above the background layer. And on this layer, we're going to draw the basic silhouette of the rabbit. So just call it rabbit. And really, we're not going to get into the details as much. We're just going to pick the color that we want. So in this case, I'm going with kind of a cream color, but you could have a brown rabbit or any kind of color rabbit you want. And in terms of brush, we just want a brush that doesn't have a lot of texture to it, because all we want to do here is draw kind of a silhouette. So you can use in the airbrushing panel the hard brush, making sure that you lift the opacity back up to 100% if you want my watercolor videos. Or if you have the illustration bundle, you're going to pick the base round brush. And here, really super simple step, you're just going to outline your character. So everything that is rabbit related, you're going to outline it so that we can later fill in the shape and create our rabbit silhouette. So I do say that this step is easy because it's easy, but it's very important. So make sure you take all the time you need to create super smooth, nice little curves here, because it's going to make a big difference in the end result if your curves and outline and silhouette overall is nice or just kind of wonky and not super polished, I guess. And if you're struggling creating smooth lines, I highly recommend that before you do this step, you warm up. So whenever you're going to do some sort of a sport, you're going to hopefully warm up beforehand. It's the same thing when you're drawing. You need to warm up your hand and your wrist and your arm. So I created a very short warm-up video that you can follow along. This is what I do before drawing, and it really helps creating smoother lines. So if you're struggling creating your outlines, just check out this video. It is linked in the description below. It's really short, but it makes a big difference. Once you have your outlines though, go ahead and just drag your color to fill in the shape. So you have your rabbit silhouette. It should look a little bit like this. Oh, I forgot to tell. A little bit like this. And And again, here, when you see a silhouette, you're probably going to notice that some things don't look quite as good when they're shaped or colored, I should say, as when they're just roughly sketched. So feel free to take all the time you need here. You can even pause the video, kind of step back, look at your silhouette, and really tweak it until you're super happy with it. This is very important. So we're also going to be doing the same thing, which is mapping out the silhouette for all the scarves, beanies, and stuff like that. So just go ahead and create a new layer above the rabbit. I'm just renaming it scarf, but we're going to draw all the clothing elements on this one. And for now, don't really worry about the colors if you're doing your own palette. Just pick whatever. I'm going to show you how to change it later and kind of experiment with the color and how to build your own color palette once you have your silhouette. So I'm going to go with a kind of bluer blue, a purpler, a redder blue than what we have for the background. But again, here, don't worry about the color for now, just worry about picking something that is different than the background and the rabbit, and then just go over, do the same thing, draw your outlines, and then fill in your shapes. Here though, you might need to make sure that you really are careful, for example, around the ears, because the beanie is above the rabbit shape. So if you just draw the beanie shape and then fill it in and not worry about the ears, then you're gonna hide the ears. So yeah, just make sure that your outlines here are even more precise than they were for the rabbit, so that everything just makes sense in kind of the order in which they are, so that the beanie is in front of the head, but the ear is in front of the beanie. So take all the time you need here to create really nice outlines, then fill them in to create the silhouettes, and we're going to meet in the next step, in which I'm going to show you how you can tweak your colors. So once you have your clothes silhouette, you can change the color very quickly by going in the adjustment panel here at the top, selecting hue, saturation, and brightness, and applying it to the entire layer. And then you're going to be able to experiment with different colors by just moving these sliders at the bottom. So the hue one is going to change the color. The saturation is going to change how intense the color is, and then the brightness is going to make it even darker or brighter. So I'm going to stick with this blue because I like it, but please by all means feel free to experiment here and pick a different color for the clothes. So once you have a base color that you like, you can go ahead and recolor some sections like the pom-pom and maybe the blade of the skates. So for that, you can just activate alpha lock on the scarf layer again, so just swiping it with 2 fingers towards the right and picking any other color you want to then just fill in without having to worry about staying within the lines. So I'm just picking pure white for the pom-poms. You can pick whatever other color you want, obviously. And for the skates, the blade, I'm just going to pick a neutral gray, so just a very boring gray, and just going over the blade. So something a little bit like this. And you could also go ahead and change the color of the different clothing elements so that they're all different from each other. I like to have them all blue, like it's a matching set. We're also going to activate alpha lock on the rabbit layer so that we can draw the little cheeks. So the cheeks, I'm going with this very pale pinkish color. You could obviously not have them, but I feel like it's really nice. It gives it this idea that the character is in the cold. So for the cheeks, you can use in the sketching panel the 6B pencil, or if you have the illustration bundle, you're going to pick the outline brush. And you're just going to be drawing very basic little circles like this for the cheeks. Again, totally optional, but I think it adds a little bit more cuteness and also this wintry cold vibe. So congrats if you've made it this far in the video. The hardest part is behind you. All we're doing now is just going to bring the illustration together, make it really look better than it does right now, but it's quite simple. So we're going to start by drawing details, so mostly outlines, but also the facial features. And for that, we're going to create a new layer, renaming it to details. And you might want to lower the opacity of the sketch so that you can very much just quite barely see it. Needs to be out of the way as much as possible, but you still need to see, for example, the sketch of the face and stuff like that. And here for the color, we're going to draw all the outlines in one color for now, and later I'm going to show you how you can recolor different sections. So honestly, right now the color that you pick really doesn't matter. I'm going to go with a dark blue, which is going to be the color I use for the outlines on the clothing elements later. But again, you can use whatever color you want because we're going to change that later. In terms of brushes, you're going to stick with what you used last for the cheeks, so the 6B pencil or the outline brush. And really here, all you're doing is drawing outlines around your entire character and adding any kind of details that you want. So like, for example, you're going to see in a few seconds, I'm going to be outlining the scarf, and I'm also going to be adding a little line pattern, I guess, just to make it more interesting without making it too busy. So any detail you want on your character as well as the outline, this is the drawer this is the layer you're drawing them on. So something like this, not forgetting the facial features as well. The only thing I'm not going to be drawing on this layer is the whiskers, because whiskers are kind of hard to draw, so it's really helpful to draw them on the separate layers so they can move them around really quickly. Now here, I'm going to stop talking, let you focus on your outlines. I'm going to speed up the video, and then we're going to meet in the next step, in which we're going to recolor some of the outlines so that they match the character a little bit better. Awesome! Once you're happy with your outlines and details overall, you can go ahead and activate Alpha Lock on that layer as well. So just swiping it again with 2 fingers towards the right or activating it manually. And now you're going to be able to just brush over your outlines with a different color to change the color of the outlines. So we're going to change the color of the bunny part. So I'm going to go with a darker version of not the bunny color, but the cheeks color. Otherwise, I feel like the bunny color, when you make it darker, looks a little bit too greenish. So I'd rather have a grayish pinkish than a grayish green. Gosh, I can't say those words. But yeah, and you could totally go with just pure black outlines if you want around your entire character. In general, I like to go with just darker version of the main shape color that the outline is outlining. Hopefully that made sense. But here again, you have total freedom in terms of what you want to do in your own illustration. If you'd rather have pure black outlines, by all means go ahead, or the same color outlines for everything that is not black, you can totally do that as well. But if you want to recolor them, that is a very quick way to do it. And one reason I like to draw all the outlines with one color at first is just in terms of workflow, you save a lot of time, especially when you're building an illustration. Here it's easy, we have a palette, we know what colors we're working with. But if you're building your illustration and later decide to change the color and you already have all your outlines in separate colors and you kind of go back and forth, it adds a lot of time. So I like to just draw the outlines all at first, and when I'm really confident with my colors, going in and changing the color of the outlines. So I'm talking a lot, but change the color of the bunny and also change the color of the facial features. So for that, you can go with a very, very dark brown, kind of chocolate brown. And you can also change the color of the outlines around the blade. So this is very, very small detail, but just making this gray even darker gray, so almost like a charcoal color, and just brushing around the blades. And by doing that, I noticed I forgot to color in a little part of the skate, so I'm just going to go back on my scarf layer and deactivate Alpha Lock, so just swiping it towards the right with 2 fingers as well, and then just kind of filling in that little shape that I forgot. You're also going to deactivate Alpha Lock on your details layer and add maybe laces. I don't know why I forgot them as well, but just picking pure white and then drawing 2 curved lines like this on the top of your skate is going to make it look like there are little laces, just adding a little bit of detail. Nothing super complicated, but it makes a difference in the end. And while we're at it, I'm also going to be adding some little eyebrows on my face here. So same color as the other facial features, just very, very pale, simple eyebrows. It just makes the character look even more expressive and just emotion a little bit clearer. For the whiskers, you can draw them on a separate layer. You don't have to rename it because we're going to merge it in just 2 seconds. And with a pure white, you can go ahead and draw the little whiskers like this. Now, this is what I was telling you. One side always look wonky, so you can use the selection tool, setting it to freehand to select around one side of the whiskers. And then with the arrow tool, you can distort them, move them, rotate them so that they kind of match the other side as well. It doesn't need to be, the exact same thing, but just to align them, that's a very quick way. And then you can just merge the whiskers layer with the details layer by squishing them with 2 fingers. And with that, we're ready to start shading. So shading, I know, can be a little bit intimidating, but don't worry, we're going to break it down. We're going to take it easy and you can totally do it. So we are going to create a new layer. We're not going to rename this one because we're just going to delete it later. And we're going to pick, well, any color that we want to use for the shadows. So just try to avoid using neutral grays or white or blacks. Try to give a little bit of a tint to your shadows. In general, I try to have shadows that are kind of the blue or purple vibe. And here, all we're going to do is we're going to draw a little circle that is going to be kind of our sun. And then we're going to draw a bunch of lines that come from the circle and then extend towards the character. So we're going to pretend these are the sun rays, and these are going to really help us place the shading, place the shadows and the lights on our character. So once you have this crazy rough sketch, it doesn't need to look any better than that, go ahead and create a new layer and rename it to shadows. Now this layer can be above or below the details layer, that's totally up to you. I like to keep it above so that it shades the outlines as well. And we're going to use the linear blending mode, for now putting it around 40-50%. In terms of brushes, you can use the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, or if you have the illustration bundle, go ahead and pick the basic texture brush. You could also use the shader, both work really fine for shadows. I just really like the basic texture brush. So here, all we have to do is start from the sun, follow the ray and see, okay, this ray is hitting, for example, the beanie, which means the beanie is going to cast a shadow on the head. Now, same thing, if we follow the ray next to it, we're going to see that it hits the scarf and the arm, so it's going to cast a shadow on the body. Same thing with the body casting a shadow on the leg. So you're just always following your sun rays and seeing, okay, what does it hit? And does this thing cast a shadow on something else? So this is a really simple way of knowing where to place the cast shadows. Here, for example, here the top part of the scarf, I guess, is going to shade the scarf that is floating or flowing below it. And maybe the top of the scarf is even going to cast a little bit of a shadow on the rabbit's back. So you can see by just following the rays that you sketch, the shadows kind of place themselves. It still requires a little bit of practice, so if you're new to illustration and shading, don't be afraid to do exactly as I am doing, but otherwise I encourage you to try and place your light source in a different region so that you can practice placing your shadows yourself. And that's really nice. We have all the cast shadow now, but there's more to shading than that. There's also what we call form shadows. So these shadows are not necessarily because there's an element that is kind of preventing the light from hitting the character. It's just the light cannot reach that part of the character because it is a 3D object that is curving away. So for example, the light cannot reach the bottom of the belly of the character because it's just not in the light anymore. So you're going to go over all your little body parts and see, okay, this is where it's curving away. So for example, here on the face, this side of the face, the right face, is not going to be getting enough, well, not as much light, so it's going to be a little bit more shaded. And these form shadows, as opposed to the cast shadows, tend to be a lot more smoother. So they're not going to have as hard edges. They're just going to be blending with the rest of the image. So for now, you can just very roughly place them. And later in the next step, once we have them all mapped out, we're just going to use the smudge tool to blend them in so that it looks way less crazy than it does right now. Awesome, so once you're happy with the rough placement, you can go ahead and hide the little sun ray sketch, or layer I should say, so that you can see a little bit better what you're working with. And all you have to do here is, like I was saying, take the smudge tool to blend in the form shadows. So you want to keep hard edges on your cast shadows because that's kind of the rule of thumb in general. I mean, some light situations are different than that, but in general, for example, if your character is outside, the cast shadows are going to be pretty precise, but then the form shadows are just going to be smooth, because they're basically just there to show that, you know, it's not a flat surface, it's a 3D object or a character. So you just want to show that volume without necessarily showing a super harsh line. So yeah, just going over and brushing to blend your form shadows. Awesome! So we're also going to be adding some highlights to really make our character pop. So create a new layer above the shadow layer, renaming it to lights. And for this one, we're going to use the blending mode add. Now add is very, very strong. So for now, you might want to put the opacity at around, 40% or something like that. And this layer, we do want it to be below the details so that the outlines can kind of hide the lights, I guess. And in terms of color, you can go with a super, super, super bright yellow orangey color. For the brush, you can use either the 6B pencil or the outline brush that we used before. Just something fairly sharp, kind of the same brush that you used for the outlines, honestly. And here you can reactivate if you want your sketch with the sun rays. I personally think it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to deactivate it in just a few seconds, but that can be helpful. Here you just follow your sun rays and seeing where it hits a form, that's where you're going to add your light. So this is not super realistic, honestly. I say that in every single tutorial, I think. Lights and shadows, when you're drawing illustrations, they don't have to be super realistic in the sense that, they don't have to necessarily follow exactly the law of physics. They just have to be believable, but above all, they just need to be something that you like. So I like having, I guess, outline. So whenever I have an outline, that's where I put my highlight, basically, focusing mostly on one side of the character, which is the side that is in the light, of course. So this is the way I like to add highlights. You might want to add highlights in a different way, so by all means, if that's the case, please do that. But that's, I guess, part of my style, just kind of drawing these highlights always on the side of, on the edges of the different shapes. One reason I really like doing that is it helps the character pop a lot from the background, because it does add this very stark contrast between the outline and the rest of the color. So it just brings up the contrast and make everything pop quite a lot. And it's also super, super, super easy. And once you have your lights, it shouldn't take too long. You can go back and play with the opacity of your shadow layer until you have something you're really, really happy with in terms of contrast in your lights and shadows. And the final little thing we might want to do is add some snowflakes in front of the character. So for that, you are just going to create a new layer above everything, so above the shadows, renaming this one to Snow 2, going back to Pure White, and going back to the Driven Snow brush in the Element panel from Procreate. So this time you're going to pick this brush and make it super, super big, and you're going to really quickly brush over your shape. And you can also use the arrow tool, setting it to uniform to make your snowflakes even bigger. And that way you're going to get the illusion of depth of field. So the snowflakes are so close to us that they look really, really big. You can also use the Gaussian blur in the adjustment panel for the entire layer, and moving your fingers from the right to left or left to right, you're going to be able to adjust the blur, giving it more blur or less blur. And that way you're going to make it look like there's a lot of depth of field, so that what is close to us is super blurry and the focus is actually on the character. Now, this brush does create a lot of snowflakes, so you can always go back in with the eraser to erase some snowflakes that are, for example, in the front of the face of the character or that are just too much. So that's really the last little step here, is just going over and cleaning your snowflakes so that they don't look overwhelming. And if you want to learn how to draw more winter-themed illustration or holiday-themed illustration, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before we leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.